So much for the ANC to try and figure out here in 2025, 31 years into our democracy, the former self-styled liberation movement, but really the pressures of having to govern, I think, all coming to bear on the party. Sean, a question in the Johannesburg context around business, and we touched on some of the scenarios earlier in the discussion, but for businesses operating in Johannesburg and Gauteng, what do you think of the different permutations of the race towards the local government elections? How should they, like, if you were giving them like an action plan or a battle plan, what do you think they should be looking at? What should they be preparing for, if anything? Any thoughts sort of in that vein?
Yeah, I have quite a lot of thoughts on this. I think I'm not convinced that business in Johannesburg is prepared for the extent of what is coming, the possible chaos and fallout for what may be coming. And if there is a prolonged period of political stalemate in the city of Johannesburg Council, as I said before, say the DA lands on 38, good result, but not what they were expecting, not enough numbers to govern coherently. The ANC falls so far, and it's kind of just a repeat of the broad coalition that they have at the moment. And then you have, but the ANC and the DA can't agree on a broad coalition to govern the council officially. Is business ready to absorb the shock that this creates? And I know this business floated this idea fairly recently about effectively a parallel council in the city, within the context of the city of Johannesburg, but what effectively would be a separate governing entity that just has a certain level of authority to do basics such as water and roads, independent of the City Council of Johannesburg. Is that what this is going to come to? That is a very real possibility, and the business may have to foot the bill for that. And if you don't get the other way of looking at it is you get the political dispensation that you want, well, then you need to fund the political actors that you want to get there. And, the onus is on business to a large extent to either get that result or to pick up the consequences if it doesn't get that result of what it wants. Now, that's quite a sort of strong statement to make, but when you strip away what may be left of the governing administration in Johannesburg, that might be what you're left with.
I just want to drive home that point. If you look at the infrastructure situation, so water, for example, something like 40% of the water supplied by Rand Water to Joburg Water, the city of Joburg, that they need to, deploy to businesses, to suburbs, etc., to township areas. Something like 40% of that supply is lost to leaks, to basic breakdowns. It's not that the dams are empty. It's not that the reservoirs are empty. It's just basic maintenance of pipes. Across the city of Joburg, we see regularly now, weekly, daily basis in parts of Joburg, even in more so-called affluent areas, Hyde Park, Bryanston, Sandton, where you've got regular water outages, and these issues are not resolved. They might be patched, but they're not fixed to the kind of level that they need to be. So on the waterfront, on waste management, you regularly have waste not being collected by the city entities. The city entity on electricity, on a national level, and to give credit to Eskom, the Eskom board, the minister, you're seeing less political interference. I think that's helped a lot for Eskom. They've really focused on giving the power station managers the responsibility. The coal fleet is functioning very well again. You don't get an energy availability factor above 70% or even 65%, where we are at the moment, just by burning diesel. I'm not saying Eskom doesn't still burn diesel, but you get it through getting your coal fleet functional again, and making sure that those managers at the power stations have that capacity. It's one thing for national electricity supply and distribution transmission to work, but then you run into the issues at city power, where it's regularly reported by investigative journalists and the work they do at News 24, Daily Maverick, how much money is lost by city power to just waste and corruption. And then again, you see the impact on businesses and citizens on a daily basis. So Sean, I really want to reinforce that point around the challenge of basic infrastructure maintenance and turnaround in a place the size of Johannesburg, the population growth, so the strain that places on infrastructure. Even if business assumes its best case scenario after the elections, whatever that might be, there's a serious mountain of work to be done in terms of just infrastructure backlogs, I think, never mind new infrastructure builds.
Absolutely. And look, businesses and wealthy individuals, wealthy families, wealthy suburbs, wealthy residents associations do what they can. And, there's incredible amount of that going on. And that's to be admired. You're protecting yourself from a failing state. The country as a whole isn't failing, but you're protecting yourself from a failing state and failing entities. And that can go a lot further, but there probably is a limit just to how far that can go. And, if water infrastructure, you might be able to protect yourself or a suburb or an enclave to a very great extent with a borehole and so on. But what if there's a large-scale water crisis on another scale outside of the realm of that enclave? That may present problems that you haven't really thought of, or problems on a new level again, that maybe the city of Johannesburg has to be, to a certain extent, evacuated or something. These things aren't exaggerations. Johannesburg is it's not built on one of the few major cities in the world that isn't built on a natural water source. I mean, that's well known. I'm not telling anybody anything they don't already know there. But it comes into the broader point that does business want to do? Is business prepared to do what it has to do to get the outcome that it wants in the city of Johannesburg? Well, then it has to be prepared to stick its neck out, and business has to be prepared to endorse certain entities that it thinks, number one, has the critical mass to govern, and number two, has the prospects to govern, and number three, has a track record of governance. And when they do then get into government, then to support them. And, whether or not that outcome arises in the City of Johannesburg Council in 2026, business could be the player that tilts it that one way or the other, that 1% one way or the other that it needed, that was necessary to get it over the line. And I think it was a colleague of yours, Katzen Ellenbogen, made a point on Biz News about this sort of parallel council that I mentioned before. But there's problems with how that could, the technicalities, the logistics of that, and would it actually have the power and the ability to govern in a parallel capacity, the road network and the water network? So you could put simply say that it would be easier if in the official council of Johannesburg that you got the outcome that you wanted, and you got an outcome that was a capable and responsible government, and that's, I guess, a lot easier and a lot simpler. There's limits to how far South Africa's enclave society can go, and that's basically the point I'm making. Yeah.
No, absolutely. At some point, you have to. I'll quote. I don't know if I'm going to kill the analogy or the sort of image here, but Russell Lamberti of Sakeliga has floated the point around. At some point, you have to dig a trench. So you can, move away. You can move to the Western Cape. You can go overseas if you're currently living in Johannesburg. And I'm not going to extend any kind of judgment on people who think that that's the best for themselves, their families, their businesses. But there might also be problems there then that you also need to try and resolve in a proactive way. So at what point do you dig a trench and decide as a business, as a household, as a community, we're going to start to push back on the sort of decline and on the decay?
Yeah, absolutely. And water issues, if you were to set up this parallel council, what water issues are extremely difficult to resolve, and it's unclear if a parallel council run by business would be able to get sufficient resources and sufficient oversight to be able to deal with the structural problems that water issues are all about. Water pipes go under the ground, cross-jurisdictional, into the next neighbouring council. Certain things might belong to the provincial government, certain things might be to the national government. So whilst that parallel council idea sounds interesting in theory, it might in reality be very difficult. And it's not to say that it's not to say that things can't be turned around. I believe they can, and I believe the speed of urban you only have to look around other cities and other countries in Africa, even in the UK and Europe and in the US, the speed of urban regeneration can be phenomenal, astounding before your eyes. And once the right sort of disposition is landed in the city council, you'll see that very quickly overnight. And if you were to get this position that you want in the council as well, the opportunities would be enormous, incredible, really.
Very much so. It's sort of the virtuous versus the vicious cycle. South Africa and I guess Johannesburg, Gauteng have been tracked in the vicious cycle for at least the last 15 years. Between 2012 and 2023, the economy averaged 0.8% growth. It's sort of, I guess 1% is our, I don't like the phrase, but it's our new normal in terms of growth. But to get to shift it in the positive direction, you need to get some of the right systems in place, different kind of political dispensation, and then also obviously proactive business. Sean, we're going to come towards the end of our discussion. I want to give you the sort of open platform, as it were. Any parting thoughts, and maybe just from my side a request. So yeah, let's say we're a year out now from the next local government elections. What do you think in the next month or two, let's say the next 1 to 3 months, what are you keeping an eye on in terms of the sort of campaigns, the rhetoric from the different parties? Is there anything that stands out to you that you're going to, closely keep track of, and amidst all the sort of noise and the press releases and all the speeches and all that kind of thing?
Yeah. So, okay, one of the main things from a risk perspective that I guess I'm keeping an eye on is the announcement of a new party. And I, with respect to them, the merger between Bossa, Rise, and Good, I don't think that party will have the appeal to garner critical mass. However, as you come into an election, about a year out or 18 months out is an optimal time to start a new political party or breakaway, because you then have momentum going into the next election. I wonder if that may have been why Zuma announced MK in late 23 ahead of the election of 24, if you see what I mean, because it had momentum. So you may see a breakaway with critical mass, new party arise. Now, I'm not going to get into all the different possibilities that could be, but I guess the thing to look out for from a risk perspective is, is it sort of a DA breakaway that eats into the DA's base? Or is it a sort of ANC breakaway that eats into the ANC's base? And, the ANC is in such a weak position at the moment that really it is only one more breakaway away from being overtaken by the DA altogether at a national level. Now, that could be a sort of far left Lessufi Mashatile breakaway that leaves a sort of center in the ANC, or it could be the other way around that leaves a sort of Cope centrist breakaway that leaves the far left elements within the ANC. Either of those two centrist dispositions to come out of the ANC, whether it's in the ANC itself or outside of the ANC, could go in with the DA at a national level or in the Johannesburg City Council if they campaign in Johannesburg. And in that case, you don't need to think about the DA getting 30 to 40% or to 50% or to 51%. In that case, the DA might only need 35%. And this coherent Cope-style breakaway that does well in Soweto and the sort of west of Johannesburg and the Johannesburg heartlands, in the ANC heartlands, could get more than enough to govern in the city of Johannesburg and possibly other councils as well, to get over the line. But if it's another sort of DA breakaway, then it might just shave a point or 2 or 5 off the DA or off the DA's growth. And then the ultimate overall dispensation of the council isn't all that different to what you have today. So it's important to look out for what sort of voter the breakaway is going after. And one last thing, generally the election system, the IEC, elections in South Africa have been free and fair until now. Most international observers, in fact, all international observers have signed off on, if I'm not mistaken, all of South Africa's elections until now, both local elections, provincial and national elections. And even last year, when the ANC dropped from 57, 58% to 39%, they even signed off on that election. And the technicalities of the system, it's quite hard to rig an election in the South African system because the votes are counted in the polling station, one of many reasons. But, one thing to look out for, if it's starting to look like the DA is going to finally win Johannesburg, either as a coherent coalition or as an outright majority, one wonders if there may be certain under-resourcing of certain polling stations. I'm not saying that the election will be rigged. I'm not for a second saying that, but I'm floating it as a possibility as things start to get very messy in the context of an ANC that's losing, and that's losing drastically and perhaps catastrophically. Might this be the first time that you see that? And, the IEC is notoriously and famously under-resourced. So, it sounds a bit cliched, but it's crunch time. It's starting to get to the crux of the matter of, will South Africa be successful or not? Will the major cities have competent, coherent governance administrations or not? And what role does business play in that? I've illustrated the role that business can play within that in endorsing the candidates that it thinks will do well or will offer good governance in those administrations. So yeah, these are all plenty of things to look out for. I've mentioned throughout the course of our talk.
No, absolutely. I cannot. We just had a Hadida there in the background in classic Johannesburg fashion. The Hadidas have to add their political analysis as well. I just want to reinforce the point around the sort of election integrity and sort of from my side, from the CRA side, the call to action by citizens. If you haven't voted, of course, if you're of eligible age, there's the responsibility and the opportunity on you to vote, but also to just get involved in sort of knowing about how the election should work, what the IEC should and shouldn't do. When you go and vote, keep an eye on things at polling stations. There's lots of opportunities to be involved either directly with the IEC to volunteer or to in other ways get involved in the political process. The fact that we've had free and fair elections since the dawn of democracy, it really shouldn't be taken for granted. Like, it's by no means a guarantee in many places around the world. And it's up to, I guess, all of us, not least business, of course,